Hello, I'm Notes, and we're a week away from Halloween. We're almost done the spooky October month. We have one last album that we're going to look at. So when we think about dark albums, Gazpacho is one of those bands that come to mind, but not necessarily because they're spooky or scary, but more because of the atmosphere that they create. There are mysteries lingering in their songs. There's things that aren't quite present. There are things hidden below the surface. And unlike as spooky or threatening, it's more inviting. This type of music was captured perfectly in their 2007 release, Night. It featured the concept of sleep and dreams. If Night defined their sound, then TikTok had perfected it. It has that same kind of a feel, except instead of being at night, TikTok for me was more in the middle of the day. Where Night and TikTok felt very similar, so did Missa Apropos and March of Ghosts. Both dealt with similar concepts, and for me, they both had the same kind of a feel. So, with the two pairings of the albums, the next album that came along was actually released this year in March. In March of 2014, Gazpacho put out their most ambitious work yet, Demon. And Demon is not only the most ambitious, but also part of their darkest subject matter that they've ever done. Now they're actually coupling their dark atmosphere, the very dark concept. So for me, I'm going to talk about three main points of this album that really nailed it. The first is the concept of this album. So the concept of this album is about a manuscript found in a Prague apartment about an unknown tenant who became obsessed with this unknown being of evil of some kind. This willful evil entity. Now I love this idea because we never really get an idea of what this unknown entity is. We only really know that it was an intellectual being that has a desire for evil and was without mercy. Now, I mean, that fits perfectly in the whole Halloween kind of a feel, where there's this unknown, creepy entity kind of lurking in the shadows. But what was it really? Was it an actual demon that was trying to do evil to us? Could it be an actual demon that had some kind of a demonic power to inflict evil energy onto others? Or again, a metaphor for us that we all have this power to be evil? And this is the concept that the band really embraced. Every song that's on this album really carries through that concept of, well, what is evil? So the album then is structured around this concept of that manuscript and what is evil. And it's this structure that's the second point that I need to talk about. A lot of thought has been put into this album and how it was delivered. If the concept was great, the structure in which it needs to be presented was equally great. So the album was structured into two parts. There are 4 songs, but in my mind there's really only 2. You have I've Been Walking, which is I've Been Walking Part 1, The Wizards of Altai Mountain, and I've Been Walking Part 2. The second is The Death Room, and The Death Room was the last word on that manuscript. So within the structure, the first few songs lay the scene. You have an introduction to the unknown author. I've been walking. I've been searching around for this entity that I feel. And at first, there's a very dark presence on this side, where either this unknown author has failed in his journey, where he wasn't able to find this evil entity that was out there, or he succeeded and he has found it. And we see this with his kind of realization that there is no El Dorado, there's no road of gold, you know, and again, is that I didn't find what I wanted, or my God, I did find it and there is no gold here. So the first part of the album is, again, that introduction. Then we have a little bit of an interlude with the next song. It's a very big contrast to the rest of the album, and I kind of like it. It just kind of takes a moment to realize that, okay, even in this dark time, yeah, still we can have some little bit of fun. But then it makes it even worse when we come into I've Been Walking Part 2. And for me, this is one of the darker songs of the album, because it really paints a picture of this small town where this demon, one way or another, whether or not he's the demon in our hearts or the demon that's out there, has captured somebody. Now, whether or not, again, this is the demon who has disappeared, or whether or not this is just an innocent bystander. Everybody wants revenge now that this individual has gone. Falling in line with the lyrics that are just, it's so well structured. The presentation of how this thing is delivered. And so at the end of this song, it's basically now them prosecuting everybody else. And is that the demon's wish? To have everybody turn upon themselves and point an accusation finger at one another? Saying, you know, get up against the wall, we're accusing you of doing this. So that's the first half of the album. The second half is the Death Room. And this is where that structure really holds in. The Death Room is the 18-minute, I don't want to say centerpiece, but definitely that one that I look upon very fondly. It kind of takes into account, you know, since Death Room was the last word on the manuscript, it really plays into who wrote this manuscript then, who put the time and effort into doing this. You know, and I think this is kind of my favorite part of the album. The fact that it opens up so many questions without answering them. It just kind of leaves it up to the listener to say, okay, what do you think? That, to me, is what really makes this album that much better. And that bleeds right into the third, and for me, the most important part, the atmosphere that is created on this album. Like all the albums that I've reviewed so far this month, it is dark. And not just in the music, but also in the subject matter. Let's just take a look at the atmosphere that is created by the music alone, and let's do it with Death Room. Death Room creates such a creepy atmosphere that has never really been captured before by the band. The use of new sounds. There's a point where they're actually creating a percussion sound by banging two rocks together. It almost sounds like there's a VHS tape that just doesn't want to play. Like every once in a while, this track will almost skip as if it doesn't want to be played, as if they have captured this evil entity and put it onto the album and it just doesn't want to play. And so at the beginning and the end of this song, you have that kind of a tension, a deep, dark tension on this album that it just does not want to break through. It's almost unsettling. And the band really pushes their limits in terms of really creating grand sounds. There's this really heavy emphasis of just punch, punch, punch in this album. Kind of like in I've Been Walking, you've got that dun 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 dun, and you've got a response in Death Room where it's just that dun 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 dun, and it's just, it's like that creature, that demon is just kind of marching towards you, and it's, but you never really see it, and that's the cool thing. You know, there's things lurking in the shadows, but instead of being inviting, it is threatening and it is tense. And not only that, but it's how these three things, the concept, the structure, and the atmosphere, all intertwined with one another, that really makes this album great. That's not to say this album is not without flaws. I do have one criticism about this album. Gazpacho was so great at creating build-up and payoff. Now this is a little bit different than structure. With build-up, you work towards something. With Demon, it felt like they were wandering around a little aimlessly, and for me, that is fine. I love aimless playing. I mean, the Mars Volta was great with this. Frank Zappa is amazing at just wandering off and exploring the land and just seeing what is found. And so this album does a great job of doing that. But with that aimlessness, it does come at a little bit of a cost. And I only mention this because Gazpacho was so great at developing the build-up and the payoff. What do I mean by that? With a build-up, you actually see the structure coming to life. The structure is more like the foundation at which the house is built. The build-up is watching that house being built and enjoying the ride. To give you an example of this, I do need to look back at their discography tonight. With Massive Illusion, they take a good 2 to 3 minutes at building up that climax in the centerpiece of that song. And that's the build-up. They build to it, they work towards it, and then when you finally get there, the payoff is so much greater. This is even found in TikTok, in the title track. In the middle of the song, there's a build-up. And once you finally build up to it, bam, it hits you. This album has the payoffs, but not necessarily the build-ups to it. You just arrive there without any kind of a warning. And that plays very well with the concept of this album. But it does kind of take away from that enjoyment of the build-up and the payoff. I just think that if they had included it on this album, it would have been better than Night and TikTok instead of just as good. Which is still friggin' amazing. So I really don't have too much to complain about. The concept and conceptualization of this album is the best that this band has done to date. That's really my main four points, but I really want to kind of know what you guys think about this album, because it is an album that really needs to be talked about, and it's an album that really warrants a discussion. You know, what did you get out of it? What did you love about this album? What did you hate about this album? I will admit, that second song, I'm still kind of edgy about it. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, but I'd love to hear what you guys kind of think. And that's it. Okay, notes out.